usually try to think of something clever for the beginning of these videos, but I can't really think of anything other than Buzdari. Zeldrizas Buzdari. Ixos Daur. But as you can tell from the background, perhaps, in the format, this video is going to be about dragons in House of the Dragon. Before I get into any of that, please do me a massive fucking favor. Slap a like on this video. The like goal is going to be -10. Alright, so the very first thing I think is important that House of the Dragon gets correct about the dragons is the size of the dragons. Now, I know that's going to be hard. Anything that has to do with something that's the size of a fucking plane is just, it's near impossible when you're scaling it next to a person. People are pretty small compared to dragons. So when you make something too big, it just looks unrealistic and it takes you out of the moment. And one of the best things about Game of Thrones was the dragon CGI. Daenerys' dragons, we watched them from birth. So yes, they got massive. Yes, Drogon was near X, Y, and Z, but it was manageable because it was only 3 of them. They killed them off, and ultimately with Daenerys and then Jon Snow and the Night King, the Night King's like pretty much full CGI when he's on the back of him, and Kit Harington's a little small guy. I'm just kidding. But no, it'll be hard to get these dragons sort of like mashing all those thoughts together. It'll be hard to get these dragons the right size. So I think the best thing they need to focus on is explaining which dragon rider has been riding their dragon since birth. And then it'll make it easy to explain how old that dragon was. You know what I mean? Was the dragon born with him? Was it like the traditional Targaryen way of putting the dragon egg with him in the crib? Was it someone they mounted, like the leaked pictures that we've seen of Vhagar being mounted by young Aemon? What's the relationship with the rider and the dragon? And then that'll maybe explain the size, and they can go into details of the history. And I'm kind of spilling into the next things that I want to say here, but the relationship with the dragon is almost just as important as the size of the dragon. The main reason being is because there's so many dragons in this, they're going to have their own personality, kind of like the direwolves in the early seasons of Game of Thrones. They need to distinguish which dragons are which. It'll be like neat to see how they handle the coloring, which is something I'll talk about in a little bit, but I think it's really important to have these dragons, each of them have their own personality, and maybe even mold that to the dragon rider. For instance, with Daemon being Caraxes. Caraxes, the bloodworm, is a red dragon. They're like extra ferocious. They could explore the relationship between Daemon and his dragon, and that would lead into, obviously, in further seasons when, we have something called the culling of the dragon seeds, where basically Rhaenyra reaches out and tries to get everyone who's within her blood to hop on the dragon and tame one. It's in the depth of the war. They're obviously super desperate to do something like that. But I just hope they explore the relationship between the rider and the dragons and get the size correct, because when they all fucking die, I guess the size really doesn't matter. That'll just appease a lot of book readers. Some of the dragons, like Caraxes, for instance, is described as being, I think, not as big as Vhagar, but bigger than Tessarion and Seasmoke or some shit. So they have an estimate or a guesstimate, really, but I think as long as there's no more than like 2 or 3 dragons in a scene at once, then it wouldn't be hard to scale them correctly. But if they do all that the right way, and take their time expanding on it, and maybe we get to see the dragons in these flashbacks when we see younger Rhaenyra and younger Queen Alicent, we'll get to see younger versions of certain dragons. And, with Ryan Condal, and I hate to say shit like this because I know it's not going to do anything but hype the fandom up, and that's kind of my job, but more so when the trailer comes out, because then I'll know what we'll be getting, so then I know what to sort of go nuts about. Obviously, they'll showcase that in the trailer, but we get to see, Vhagar is a dragon from Aegon's conquering of Westeros, so there's a time period where Viserys, Rhaenyra's father, is younger, and he actually rides Balerion the Black Dread until Balerion dies. So Balerion was written by Aegon, and Balerion, I'm sure most of you know, is the largest fucking dragon of all goddamn time in the world of Ice and Fire, or in Planetos, whatever, in Westeros and in Targaryen history. So it would be super exciting to see something like that, and if so, it would have to happen in the first season, with us doing these flashbacks. And then, I have a little bit of notes here. This video wasn't going to be very long, but and this just sort of ties into what I was saying earlier. The relationship between the dragon riders, the size, the color is important. Like I mentioned, red dragons are known to be ferocious. Black dragons have certain personality traits. So do green dragons, and that's obviously more explored in the Song of Ice and Fire novels. But that's not that was kind of teased, where Daenerys sort of named her dragons after her brother Viserys and Khal Drogo, and like their sort of place in her life, like Drogon being the biggest, being the closest to her. Khal Drogo had the biggest effect on her, and that's like butchering it down to like the simplest way of putting it, but I'd like to see that explored. It's important in George's lore. He wouldn't spend time writing about it if he didn't think it was important to discuss the personality of dragons, but also, or sorry, the color of dragons. And I'm skipping ahead there, but lastly is the personality of the dragons is also important. Like their color has to tie into it, but really I want the dragons to stand out on their own. Like Ghost was known for "come in here, boy." I want like there to be a scene with Rhaenyra's dragon and Daemon's dragon, and we can see how they bond, and maybe we'll see how certain dragons, and we'll get to see how certain dragons who were close at one point will then have to go to war with each other. That actually happens a lot with people that swore themselves to Rhaenyra, and then Alicent does what she does, and then they're forced to sort of betray sides. There's been like some casting leaks of some people who I don't trust the source of the site, because they had said a certain actor was going to be playing Corlys Velaryon, and it ended up being someone who was not that person. So there's a rumor in a video that goes with it of like these two twin dudes who are doing a role for Eric and Arik, who are twin knights. One of them is sided with the Greens, one of them is sided with the Blacks. In the script seemed fucking legit, because they're talking about, how could, one of them's mentioning like, how could you follow the tyrant little shithead Aegon? And the other one's like, well, we're like, that's whatever. So without getting into too much detail, that happens a lot with people in the war. They're like, it's like the Civil War in America. It's like brothers fought cousins or whatever the fuck. So it's a similar idea in the Targaryen Civil War. When everything's good and King Viserys is alive before he dies, a lot of the people who end up facing off later are really close with each other. Some of them end up being twins. So I'd like to see that relationship explored further with the dragons. So some of the dragons whose riders are close with each other, maybe something happens and maybe the story's manipulated for this adaptation and we get to see them face off. And it makes that death so much more vicious. I think this story is, obviously there's fucking dragons in it, but I think it may be easier for Ryan Condal, Miguel Sapochnik, and all of their other writers that are helping them to apply that rule that George has, which is like good fantasy is like a pot of soup, a stew, where like you can add just the right amount of salt, and that's the fantasy element, and it fucking tastes amazing. But if you put too much salt in there, it'll put you into some sort of salt coma. It'll be too much and it'll taste nasty. So maybe they could apply that rule to this new show and keep the super fantasy elements, like obviously the Night King, and maybe like everything related to the magic of House Stark, sort of downplayed until maybe the later seasons, or maybe early on. I mean, we're all gonna want to fucking see House Stark. They're like a massive draw to the show, but this show is all about the Targaryens, baby. I'm saying that and have a House Stark sigil tattooed on my arm. But maybe they could downplay those elements, the House Stark magic, a little bit, and more so keep to just like dragons. They're like, some of them have personalities, but some of them are more like a tool for war, and that's like They can be killed, establishing how they're killed. And, Westeros in this time period is more used to having dragons around. So the ways to take them out are probably a lot more savage and brutal and more effective. So I don't know. All of that. Most of my videos are like a giant ramble session because at this point in my life, I'm making them when I have time to do it. So if you enjoy this content, if you enjoy my content, slap a like on this video. The like goal is going to be -10. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Super special shout out to every single person who made it all the way through this video. My name is Mark, and this has been Sir Hunson. I've needed to clear my fucking throat this whole video. Reviews, long night.